This study is about managing differences and polarization at the workplace. And I found this one pretty interesting as well as the last one. So the researchers had the following hypotheses. One, that policy instrumental information, which we'll get onto in the methods section for more information, but policy instrumental information will decrease the negative affect of Republicans towards Democrats, while coalition expressive information will decrease the negative affect of Democrats towards Republicans. And then the second hypothesis is policy instrumental information will increase the positive affect of Republicans towards Republicans, while the coalition expressive information will increase the positive effect of Democrats towards Democrats. And the methods of the study were they had 1,146 respondents of US residents, included for quotas of gender, income, and age to mimic US populations. Respondents were randomly sorted into one of three groups. They had a control group, a policy instrumental information treatment group, and a coalition expressive information treatment group. So these two groups, the policy instrumental information treatment is where these respondents were made to view a table listing the social welfare policy positions of each party on 4 issues. So they viewed this table. On the coalition expressive treatment, the respondents viewed a table listing the 4 social groups most strongly associated with each party. So difference between the policies versus the social groups. And so after viewing these tables, they were then asked to list up to 5 things they like and they dislike about the Republican and Democratic parties, a measure used in previous studies evaluating polarization. And the results of this were that providing policy information about the parties decreased Republicans' negative affect towards Democrats, while providing party coalition information decreased Democrats' negative affect towards Republicans. Neither type of information, however, causes a significant change in in-party affect, which is interesting. And this provides evidence that an asymmetric informational intervention can decrease negative out-party affect. And so the key takeaway that Anna Priya took from this for organizations is one, checking for polarization, because it can be common now for employees to bring political opinions and views into the workplace. In some cases, these types of conversations can lead to healthy growth, but it can also lead to toxicity and these comments to become out of hand. And so keeping checks on employees just to sense environmental tension and plan evidence-based interventions to make the discussions, if they're happening, more conducive to growth can be helpful. Then the second takeaway is the focus on policies versus coalitions, focusing on which groups, individuals, or departments tend to favor certain company policies. There can be discussions and disagreements with regards to company policies and decisions, which can lead to polarization. And these departmental groups can act as coalitions and can divide employees at times in terms of what they agree with in terms of the future of the company. And this specifically can be common among board members. And so the research found that this can be mitigated by focusing on the rationale behind these policies rather than which groups support them. So focusing on the rationale versus the groups. And so having discussion groups and having transparency around company plans and decisions can create more trust and reduced polarization regarding them. So I found this very interesting. I'm interested to hear what you all think about this as well.
Well, I'm hitting on the on her takeaway about and maybe this was something that the authors took away, which was like focusing on the rationale behind policies rather than focusing on the groups that support them is super important to reduce polarization. That makes a lot of sense. It's like the transparency and the inclusivity of a process where you're bringing someone in to understand why the policy exists, and then getting some input from them and being really transparent about how you came to these policy decisions. Like that's all really important stuff. So it makes so to me, like with the study, it makes sense where it says the providing policy information about the parties decrease Republicans' negative. So that makes sense if what the policy information means, the reasons behind the policy. I'm assuming like this is why the policy exists. Is that what the policy information was?
Yeah, so in the experimental treatment, they had essentially kind of four categories of types of policies. So they had, like, for example, healthcare. And on the Republican side, they said support shrinking Medicaid to cover fewer Americans. And then on the Democrat side, it said support expanding Medicaid to cover more Americans.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't reasons. It was just pure like, what is the policy essentially? Like,
right.
and then what was the party coalition information? What was that like?
So that was they had Republicans, Democrats, and they had four different kind of social groups that identify like stereotypically as in those political parties. So, for example, on the Republican side, they had evangelical Christians, people over 65 years old, people who earn over 250,000 per year, and Southerners. And then on the Democrat side, you had atheists, agnostics, LGBTQ individuals, union members, and then African Americans. And those are the two different social categories.
And using those, Democrats' negative affect towards Republicans decreased. I'm curious why that would be the case.
Yeah, that's very interesting to that, just being aware of being aware of the subgroup within a group makes decreases their negative affect. It's interesting,
maybe it humanizes them or something. It takes the Republican thing out of it and actually goes, it's actually these people, it's these older people or Southern people or something where it's like it feels like more human.
That's what I was thinking. Like maybe it's just understanding perspectives better of these different groups.
Yeah, it might be. I'm trying to read the results of the study to see what exactly the takeaway was.
This does remind me, I always go back to that one study we did months back that Beyond Conflict did, where it showed, that we're just more polarized because of things like the media and our perceptions rather than actually our differences on policies. There may be some differences, but when you get down to the root of that, sometimes it's a lot easier to understand where the similarities are opposed to just the differences.
Yeah, and I think when you make salient a group that doesn't feel so oppositional, so if you look at someone and you go, he's a Republican, and you go, oh, I don't like him because he's a Republican. But if you didn't know that information and you just looked at him and said, oh, he's a guy who's 67 years old, then you might go, oh, well, I don't have a problem with him, But as soon as I know that he's in some sort of opposition. So if you make salient the actual individual or person or group that you don't have a problem with, as opposed to the group that you do have a problem with, maybe that's why.
Yeah, that could be. And yeah, and I wonder how many. I don't know if the sample would be interesting to see how many would define themselves in one of those four categories. Too.
Well, it's just it's Natalie hit on the media. I mean, it's unfortunate we're at the point where you can literally divide people into one of two categories. Either it's this political party or that political party, and if you in whatever political party you tend to subscribe to or whatever, you automatically assume a whole bunch of stuff about them based on that. Without getting to know someone, and that's just a stereotype. And so maybe drilling down into we'll give them at least one more piece of information about who they are, humanizes them a bit. It lessens the stereotype in some way.
But what's interesting, I want to believe that as well, but I'm just reading through this, and why would it be that it's not the same for Republican identifying individuals to have more of a substantial decrease when they're given the coalition information about the parties? It doesn't go the other way around. It's not when Democrats are given the coalition information about Republicans, it has a substantial decrease, but not the other way around.
I was looking at the results just now, and I think it was important to note that they said it didn't, while it does technically decrease the negative effects, there still are a lot of negative effects. So they noted Republicans on average list, this is just one example, Republicans on average list more than one more dislike for Democrats than they do things they like about Democrats. But when given policy information about the parties, Republicans list only 1/2 more dislike than likes of Democrats on average. So there's a slight decrease when
Just a
Republicans are
really
given
slight
coalition
decrease.
information.
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes, we look at these studies and there is a statistically significant effect because of the sample size. But if you actually look at the real effect, it's so small. So it's just like, what does it really mean? I don't know. Well, it's also interesting that why would just hearing the policy information, not the explanation of it, but just the policy, why would that decrease someone's negative affect? It almost feels like it would increase it.
So it looks like, sorry to interrupt. It looks like they might have been given the tables with the information, and then I think they were supposed to self-respond to that on their feelings about the policies.
Oh, interesting.
I think that if that's what I'm glancing through this, but I think that's my understanding of what they were trying to get from that. But the main purpose of the study looks like they were trying to, let's see. They note in the discussion, it's imperative that scholars identify effective strategies to rehumanize out partisans and reduce excessive negative effect in politics.
Yeah, so something about humanization.
Mm-hmm.
There's some effect here it's humanizing. Maybe reading some of the policies helped to humanize, helped to gain some perspective of the other party or something like that.
I wonder too if how much the activity after they read the different things also impacted, because they were asked to list up to 5 things they liked and disliked about each party. And I just wonder how much thinking about what you would like about the other opposite party, how much that would help decrease negative affects, I bet you could come up pretty quickly with things you dislike, but you'd have to think a little bit longer about things you like, and that if that
Right.
extra time would lead to, and specifically after being put on these treatments.
So the way that they measured the result, the way that the measurement or the instrument that they used was the number of things they said they liked versus the number of things they said they disliked. Was that the measure?
They had to list up, well, actually up to 5 things. That's a good question. I thought that it was just, let me see. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is. Yeah, so they said, for example, one Democratic respondent answered that they disliked the Republican Party for 4 different reasons and left a blank the item asking what they liked about the Republican Party. So they had a out party affect score of -4.
Okay. Okay. So that's how they did it. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically you get a little bit of a perspective or a little bit of an understanding of someone's other group, and it's harder to figure out. It's more difficult to identify how many things you dislike about them, and a little bit easier to identify something you might like about them, or at the very least, just identifying fewer things that you dislike about them, because it's just sort of the net score.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like we're looking at humanization of some sort of perspective taking or humanizing.
Yeah, but I think in a more strategic way that focuses on differences rather than similarities. Like most of the time we sort of do, and it speaks to this. I'm thinking another takeaway from this. It's talking about how most efforts to depolarize the parties and decrease negative partisanship are rooted in psychological strategies that recategorize or otherwise change social identity conceptualization to see similarities with social groups. But talking about how that has failed in terms of partisan divides. And so they're saying the most effective solution is to actually make light of or make salient the differences between the parties in order to rehumanize in a different way. So not focusing on what brings us to what our shared group identity is, but like acknowledging the differences and rehumanizing through the differences. So I think that's a really interesting kind of tactic. And we talk about this in our moving from identity to humanity training about being, it's not always about finding common ground and shared group identity. Yes, that's great in many tactics and many strategies, right? But sometimes it's important to find the balance of what you identify as a difference, like using similarities and differences more strategically and not always just kind of
But so I think when you use differences strategically, like in this case, you are actually making salient underlying it a shared humanity. We may not have shared positions or shared groups, but we have a shared humanity, and that gets more highlighted when we look at differences without opinions and judgments placed on them. Because the main thing here is you see the policy or you see the group and there's no judgments on them. And unfortunately, you see like in the media, it's not just the policy. It's like the policy is this and it's horrible because of all these things. And it's like, okay, well.
Yeah, because it's categorizing in more of a threatening.
Right. It's immoral, it's evil,
yeah.
So if you just give them straight the policy without judgments and assumptions, then maybe it lets them know, okay, there's human beings on the other side of this thing that have these other needs or something. Why can't we just have news that reports the facts without the judgments? So much more helpful.
My mom says all the time she almost went into journalism, but she decided not to because she felt like there was just too much opinions